Matthew Blair. Matthew Blair, we have the National Lawyers Guild.
Yes, that's correct. May I speak?
Yes, please.
Thank you. My name is Matthew Blair. I am an attorney here in Providence. I'm with the National Lawyers Guild, which is a group of lawyers who try to assist protesters in their right to engage in constitutionally protected speech. So, we are known, well, we go to protests, we try to make sure everyone is engaging in lawful behavior, especially police. And so as someone who's been to many protests and who I'd like to think represents the interests of protesters and the interests of the First Amendment, which we've spoken about, this is not a great bill. It's late. I have 4 pages. I will not speak to them. Instead, there was a lot of talk, and if I may address the issue of, does this bill say we can hit protesters? The answer is no. The bill does not say that. It does say due care. I would argue, although I don't have to argue yet, that it could never be due care to hit a protester, but that aside, I think it was discussed before, we can't just look at the text of the bill, even when the text of the bill is somewhat confusing and very short. We have to look at the underlying motivation. So we heard, well, when I wrote this, I was wondering why anyone would propose it now, why anyone would say we've had 3 or 4 big protests, very peaceful protests, no arrests, nothing in the past month. I mean, it's only been a month and a half. And so I thought, why does someone, submit this? This person must either really love our president, or this person must really not like refugees, not like women.
Mr. Price. Mr. Price. Matthew, walk up.
Okay.
Walk up. Please stand.
Sure. So the bill itself just talks about protesters in general, not specific protests, but having heard the remarks of someone in this body, it sounds like the intent behind this protest was, maybe it was to prevent I-95 from ever being blocked, maybe it was because there was a grudge made against Black Lives Matter because someone's car was blocked. I would not have been happy had I been stuck in traffic on I-95 that day. However, the laws account for that. Rhode Island 1145-1. Disorderly conduct. Blocking the highway is already very much prohibited by the law, and since...
So you would agree there's no constitutional right to protest by block?
No, I disagree. I'm just telling you what the law says. I don't want to waste everyone's time.
You think the Constitution?
Yeah, so the First Amendment...
Let me ask one.
Sure.
So, do you think the Constitution, First Amendment Constitution, gives people the right to block?
That's not just my view, that's been the view of judges ever since the Civil Rights Movement and the Freedom Marchers. Specifically, the case of Williams versus Wallace, 1965, which was a case in which John Lewis, among other protesters, wasn't given a right to protest along Route 80 between Montgomery and Selma, Alabama. So in that case, the judge ruled, these rights may be exercised by marching, even along public highways, as long as it is done in an orderly and peaceful manner. And these rights to assemble, demonstrate, and march are not abridged by arrest or other interference, so long as the rights are asserted within the limits of unreasonably interfering with the exercise of rights. Also read the whole thing.
Good answer.
Thank you. But the idea is just, there's a balance that is always struck. The First Amendment does very much protect the rights of people to protest on the highway, on the street. You're not supposed to block traffic. So people did that. They were in violation of the law, and some of them were arrested. They were charged. And I believe they were found guilty of disorderly conduct.
Did any of them have a trial? Was that the defense? Do you know?
I believe they did qualify it, and there was a trial. They did not skirt, I don't believe, at least one of them, the charges were upheld in at least one case. But again, 2 years ago, so I'm still baffled why we're dwelling on something that was 2 years ago, and for the record, I think history has judged the Black Lives Matter movement to be enormous, and 2014 was a banner year for that. The people stuck on the highway at the time may not have recognized that. We take those lessons from 2014, we apply them to now, and instead of saying, good, Black Lives Matter, instead of saying, good, we have the largest single-day protest in American history, we have the International Women's Day today, we have people mobilizing, and instead of congratulating them, instead of saying, thank you for what you're doing, we're giving people the right to hit them with a car. I realize the bill doesn't say that. I'm not saying I care. I'm just saying what this bill says to anyone who's protested, and I think the people in this room can speak to that, is we can hit you with a car. We love your right to speak, but we can hit you with a car. Any questions?
No. Well, it's a question.
So conversely, you think that your protest should trump anybody's right to travel? Is that what you're saying?
It's not.
And then one more question is, so you keep mentioning Black Lives Matter, and our new president, Donald J. Trump, who I do like, seeing how you brought it up, I'd like to ask you a question. So you work with Black Lives Matter?
No.
You represent?
No.
You represent protesters? Do you represent protesters?
Hang on.
Do you accept one?
One question, one answer.
Okay. So what is your one question?
Start with the first question.
So
Whatever it is.
I'd like to clarify.
So
I didn't
you-
bring up Black Lives Matter. That was the comment that you came up.
I didn't say anything.
No, we were in the I-95. You were stuck in the car. Is that correct?
Yeah.
No, hang on.
protest.
Sorry, hang on. Matthew, you don't get to ask questions.
Oh, sorry. This is my first time here.
That's okay. That's all right. Good
So my question is, you brought up Black Lives Matter, and you represent protesters, correct? As a lawyer,
That is correct.
who pays you?
It is a volunteer association on pro bono.
It's on pro bono from where? Do you accept any money from George Soros to your fund?
No, we don't.
Okay.
And if we did, I don't think that would be relevant. I think we were talking about staying on the bill. I don't think the source of funding for my organization is relevant.
Actually, I disagree. I think the source of funding for witnesses is important. But you asked the question, you answer. So,
Sorry, that was. The question is, did I receive payments for this or anything else? Am I lobbying? No, this is all volunteer.
Mr. Price is not an attorney, so you may want to explain to him what pro bono is.
For free.
Excuse me?
For free or for good.
Okay.
So that's to say, in the same way that there's been a lot of talk about paid protesters, which I think no one has seen, and no one's seen any evidence of it, and there's been no.
There's no
There's
paid
no-
protesters, you haven't seen any paid protesters?
Right,
Have you seen any
Bill
big
definitely does not touch upon the issue of debt process, so I'm not going to allow that. Mr. Price, do you have any more questions?
No.
I've got to ask one.
Oh, this is all right, who is an attorney, so you don't have to explain the line.
So you reported that case out of Alabama,
Yes.
and did that case stand for the proposition that you can block a highway, or that you have the right to protest along a highway as long as you don't block it?
Okay, good question. Yes, it does stand, and most of the cases they have the right to march or to take some form of a public sidewalk, a highway, in this case specifically Route 80, so long as you do not obstruct it. That's the First Amendment, that's our history, and then that is what we balance with our IGL 1141, saying when you block the entire thing, then it's disorderly conduct. Then you can go to jail for 6 months. We have that bill. People can go to jail for 6 months. We talked about civil disobedience. Civil disobedience encompasses jail. No one should be hit by a car for their beliefs.
Would you agree there's a federal constitutional right to interstate travel?
Yes, however, yeah, but that's a right against the government. It's also a right that hasn't actually been applied in that many cases. I think it's between cases. It's one of those. As a lawyer, you know that's not an often used. That's almost like a residual clause of the Constitution.
Well, I think it's actually a very good point, right? That was one large part of the civil rights movement.
Oh, sure. But again, we're talking about moving to a different state or the government impinging on you. This isn't protesters like everything, and hopefully we'll talk about this with the First Amendment. It's the government doing this. These are rights against the government, and again, like any right, it has to be balanced. Therefore, you can't stop someone and say, I didn't stop you, and say interstate right to travel. You balance that against the right, and then you come up with some compromise. But I don't think that's the issue we're talking about.
But conversely, you're stating that this bill will take away people's First Amendment rights because it gives a private person, quote unquote, the right to run someone over, I think was said earlier. But if it's a private person, it doesn't implicate First Amendment issues because it's not the government restricting the protesters.
To clarify, I didn't actually say this necessarily violates the First Amendment. I'm saying these kind of cases historically involve a balancing of issues, which is the First Amendment, which is the absolute right to free speech, versus the lesser right for travel or to be on the highway. So most cases, most laws, most judge-made decision balances and comes to some happy medium, which is you can be here, and then if you take up X percentage of the sidewalk, then you'll go to jail. No law that I'm aware of that has been passed no judge has ever said, anytime you're on the sidewalk, you have a free rein to be hit. And even though it's not in the car, immunity is.
It says it in the,
It says
in the road,
What is it, public right away?
public right of way.
So any street, you didn't even do the highway. If you want to do a bill, I mean, you shouldn't do this bill, but if you really care about I-95, it's the middle of the highway.
No.
So no, the interstate right of travel isn't even implicated by that because you said any street or road. That's a gross imbalance in the first amendment. You already have the law. You don't need to do this. This is a poor law with a bad balance. And I'm sorry that your traffic was blocked. It must have been inconvenient. It was half an hour, but there's no reason to pass this law.
Well, there's no reason to stand on the highway with a mob of people blocking on.
John Lewis did.
John Lewis,
You
they weren't
said-
traveling 65 miles an hour when John Lewis was standing in the road.
So you did this out of safety concerns.
Safety issue. You have fire trucks, you have police, you have ambulances, and you have people that might be in duress.
Right.
Sorry. We answer questions. Mr. Price asked, do you have more questions, Mr. Price?
Do you think it's a safety issue?
No.
You think it's not a safety issue?
You know, your bill says that pedestrians protesters can be hit, so I get it if you say, don't be on
That's all I
the.
have. That's
If
all I
you say
have.
disorderly
No,
conduct.
that's all I have, thanks.
Jail is safe. Hitting protesters with cars is the opposite of safe.
All right, any other questions?
It
Mr.
doesn't say
O'Grady,
that.
about that. Hang on.
Community for
It doesn't say it. It doesn't
Mr.
say it.
O'Grady,
Thank you.
Representative O'Grady.
Chairman, I'm not a lawyer, but since you are, let me answer this question. Is there a standard for acute care?
That's a good question. I should have.
A question about the bill.
The law of negligence, but in my mind, and the person who wrote this bill can feel free to correct me. I think it's linked to a reasonable standard or a negligence standard that you're doing generally the right thing or what a reasonable person would do. You're operating within the laws of the highway, and that is why I originally said I'm not even sure, and that's why I said I'm not sure. It would be worth talking to a lawyer who does this to see if due care even is a concept that can be applied. I think off the top of my head, if it's a similar to a negligence standard, there's no way you can exercise due care and hit the pedestrian at the same time.
So if that's the case, let's go with that. If that's the case, then how is this bill giving anyone the right to hit?
Well, that's the idea. I'm not even saying this bill is legally sound. It's very possible you could pass this bill, which again you shouldn't, and then it would go to court, and then a judge would laugh at it and say total immunity for due care for hitting a protester. I don't think this is meant to necessarily hold up in a court of law because there are big ambiguous concepts like that run counter to each other. So I don't think it would. I mean, I don't write this
There's a
bill.
lawyer in the room that would disagree with you.
Okay.
But
So due care is.
how the system works is representatives can draft bills.
Right.
Mr. Price has drafted a bill, he's introduced it, we're having a hearing on it. Nothing about that makes it a well-written bill or sense, or it's just the process. So,
I'd be curious to hear.
well, why don't you talk to him after the hearing? If he's willing to do so. It's always an option. Okay, any more questions for Attorney Blair? Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you.
Catherine Barrett.